My name's Sergeant Cho. I'm with 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, Aztec Company. My MOS is in 0311. So while we were still on ship, my understanding of the situation in Afghanistan was that the U.S. government was trying to pull out of Afghanistan. I mean, this had been in the news for years. Like, I know that Trump wanted to, and then Biden was now in office, and then I heard that a hard timeline was being set around August or the fall-ish time frame of that summer, and we were in that theater. So from what I was being told was that there's a potential that we might be going into Afghanistan to help out with the evacuation. When we received the tasking, I didn't believe it was real because it just didn't seem like it would ever happen. Like, the Marine Corps had been at peacetime in a while. We hadn't been to Afghanistan in a while, so I just thought, wow, this is a surreal moment. Like, no way this is happening. I don't remember the exact date. However, I do know that, like, I found out around 3 in the morning, and by sunrise, we were already staged at the airport, ready to hop on the flight to go into Afghanistan. The rest of the company pushed ahead, but our platoon was actually on a working party, on another air base in Kuwait. So we were on a later flight. So we arrived at nighttime, and the briefing was that, when we get off, like, everyone will be in full kit. Like, there's a potential that we might be having to run to the nearest cover, like, seeking shelter. However, when we landed, it was just seemed like a normal day. In the time from when we landed, the intel brief was that the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, whatever, hadn't reached Kabul yet, and the city was still in control of what was remaining of the ANA government. The night we arrived, we got debriefed on what's going on. We unpacked. We all went to sleep. The next day, we actually linked up with 10th Mountain, and they were basically going over the layout of the base. They were giving us tours because 10th Mountain had been there for several months, and they were actually ready to head out to leave that base and go home to America. So they were showing around where the TOC was, the COC was. Their vehicles are actually going to give us all their armored assets for us to use. And that was just basically the transition all day. Like, even like throughout the day, there was points where we're just going to the chow hall. There were shopping centers on that airport, and a lot of us even went shopping on the airport on that day, the next day that we arrived. And we're just like, oh, like, this situation was blown way out of proportion. Like, this just feels like a normal day. It doesn't feel like what I imagine Afghanistan to be like until that night, when after everything was done, around, like, everyone was bedded down to go to sleep, and that's when we got the word about the airfield being ran over, or like the ANA government. Like, that night when the airfield got ran over, before all of that, was probably around evening time frame. That's when we started hearing a lot of, like, in the distance, like, gunfire in the distance, and then we got word told that the ANA, the regular army guys, like, they were all had deserted their posts around the Kabul airport. And so I was in 3rd platoon at the time. 2nd platoon and 1st platoon got sent out to reinforce different parts of the base to, like, pick up on gate duty. Our platoon was on QRF, sitting waiting for anything to happen. Over the radio, we'd hear about how 2nd platoon actually received a single sniper shot over their heads, and 1st platoon was dealing with some unknown vehicle at their checkpoint, and how I don't recall who, like, what nationality it was. I believe it was ANA. Someone threw a cell phone over the wall, and then his hand got blown up because it was a cell phone IED. So yeah, 2nd platoon took that sniper fire, and they couldn't really pin it. Like, they got the general direction of where the fire came from, but it was in a building too far out for them to accurately engage, and there's a civilian population to consider. There's only one shot, so there was no returning fire. Initially, we were on QRF for 2nd platoon and 1st platoon. However, all the chaos that was starting to occur in the city with the Taliban now having reclaimed Kabul, we got news that, like, the president of Afghanistan fled the country. However, towards the night, a lot of the gunfire started to die down. The situation started to die down, so we got told to go away. We were about to bed down when the call came my squad leader actually came running into where we were sleeping at and saying, "Put your kit on, we gotta go." CO just updated us that there's potential enemy fighters inside the airport with AKs and RPGs, and so we put our kit on as quick as possible, and we're running towards the military airport terminal. We're running out, and at that point, our situation update is that there's enemy fighters on this airport. And as we're running out, we see other Marines haven't gone out to the airfield yet, but they were holding security with their guns up and everything, just point down range as we were flowing right by them. So up to that situation, we thought we were going to go and see and get contact from someone out there on that airfield. So as soon as we popped out, we soon realized that there wasn't any enemy fighters out there, and it was just masses of civilian population trying to get onto a C-17 that was trying to leave. And then there was probably hundreds and thousands of them, and that just became us getting online. 10th Mountain came out there and got online with us, a bunch of supporting armored vehicles behind us, and that just became a several-hour operation of just us pushing the civilian back from the military side of the terminal all the way to the civilian side of the terminal. After the chaos ensued of the civilians overrunning the airport, that was probably a 2-day operation of just continuous crowd control on the terminal, because for at least 2 days straight, we couldn't get control of that airport. The initial wave that came on, by the time we pushed them across, the sun was beginning to rise, and we were just holding there for a while. And then finally, that's when I first saw 2-1 come out. They came to relieve us, and then once we got relieved, we went back towards the halfway point of the runway, and we were staged there for maybe 30 minutes till we got the news that the civilian population had broken through the line again, and we're just bum rushing the field. And that's when we all went back to help out with the crowd control and just continued pushing through. Initial crowd broke through 2-1's line, and obviously there was 1-8 there too, the initial line, and we went out parts of Alpha Company went back out to help again. That's when crowd control really wasn't working anymore. We just couldn't hold them in there. It was just too big of an airfield, and just be gaps everywhere with just civilians would just break through, get through, and then that's when someone spotted someone holding an AK by the civilian side terminal. And I don't know who took the shot. I don't know if it was Army or one of the Marines, but someone fired a single shot, hit him in the head, dropped immediately. As soon as that happened, his other buddy who came out of a building also with an AK on him, and that's when essentially half a company's worth of Marines and soldiers just opened fire on that guy, and then another guy also holding an AK, so 3 guys in total. So when we get to Northgate, we don't know how long we're going to be out there, but that was resolved pretty soon. We knew that there's going to be a rotation of Alpha Company. We have Northgate. One platoon's going to be the security for the actual gate itself. Another platoon's going to be conducting searches on civilians getting let through, and the third would be up on guard posts, providing overwatch for the platoon that's conducting security at the actual gate itself. And that was just a rotation for basically a 4-hour rotation, just each platoon switching between each role, and a 12-hour shift in total where one of our sister companies would come out and relieve us, and it would be a 12-on, 12-off cycle, where that's how they try to make it be for majority of the time we're out there. Some things that stick out to my mind from being at Northgate. So there was this canal that ran right by Northgate, and the smell coming out of it, how disgusting that water looked and probably was, and how desperation of certain people just to go into that canal to try to ask us to let them in and stuff like that. Obviously we tried to make a line, but obviously every attempt we made to making a line, they would just, within 10 seconds, that line would just disappear and just be a mass of people fighting for a spot to get in. So some people were trying to bypass it using the canal and trying to get to us directly and talk to us face to face instead of being stuck in the back, at least 200 meters away. So those people, they're trying to bypass. I mean, so security issues, it's just a mass of people. We can't really, like, Overwatch is there, but they can't, there's too many people to just constantly be like having, like, recognize anything. Everyone had suitcases, backpacks, so any one of those things could have been an IED out there. Any one of them could have had a firearm hidden under their clothing. So it was just, the security aspect was that we can try to prevent something from happening with our Overwatch positions. However, it's more likely going to be a reaction type of situation where someone's incurring something first and we're reacting to it. Truck, approximately, I would like to say 70 meters. That would be the closest. Not engaging with the Taliban anymore, it just felt really weird. I mean, that was my first deployment, so I never been over there, I never fought them, so it was just a little bit different experience for me. But growing up in the Marine Corps, like, all my senior staff, NCOs who've been there probably multiple times, you could see it in their faces, the seriousness of how they were taking it. Like, some of them there were times where a lot of them were incredibly pissed off about the whole situation. Why are we working with these guys? Which I, like, would try to resonate with, understand, but it was just, they spent years fighting them, some of these senior leaders. They lost brothers, sisters out there, and so it just felt unreal that we were working with a group of people that we spent the last 20 years fighting. Because of the security risks that were present, obviously, as mentioned before, we didn't really try to send Marines. So we had a line of C-wire out, and we just opened that C-wire up to let people in. Occasionally, whether it be like a State Department guy would come and ask us to help them grab an individual or family out of the crowd, or some of us would occasionally go outside of the C-wire line and grab people. However, the ANA, they were basically the force that would go out into the crowd and try to better control them from outside the C-wire barrier that we had. Probably approximately 50 meters back from the front lines of Northgate, we also had some medics that were also at Northgate with us, so they all could support. I would say a third of everyone we're letting in were getting turned back around. Yeah, so there'd be people with fake IDs trying to come in. It was like, even with I'm an untrained guy, like, you could easily tell that was a fake ID. Or some of the other people would be, they got let in, but someone else who was still stuck outside the wire was holding their passport, or families would get brought in, and like some family members would have passports and some wouldn't, and then that's when the State Department would say, no, we can't let everyone in. You have to go back out, link up with your group again, make sure everyone is carrying their own passport. And some of the confusion came along where some days it was, if there's a group, a family, one person in that family holds on to everyone's passport and and then from there we'll figure it out. Or other days it was everyone hold on to their respective passports, and it was just a confusion. I believe that caused a massive amount of confusion. It was definitely a lot of desperation out there. Just confusion with paperwork, what they needed. A lot of it also was families getting separated. Like, when we'd open the COR up to start letting people in, when we close the COR back up because we just have an overfill of people in Northgate at that point, and we're trying to conduct security checks on them. A lot of times families would get separated. Sometimes half the family would make it in, and they'd be begging for us to get their family. And the only option at that point was, rarely, every once in a while, someone would go out there back to the wire and say, point out who's your family member, bring them in. Other times it was, you're going to have to exit the gate and try again. The time we were there, we'd hear about other companies, other platoons, sniper platoon, like taking shots every once in a while. Experiences definitely had to be the first 2 days when the airport wasn't secured, especially when it was just a constant battle of pushing the civilians toward the civilians out of the terminal, trying to get them to leave. But once we got to that point, the desperation was so real that they just run like they just bum rush at us, saying that they'd rather deal with us rather than leaving the civilian airport, because the Taliban were just right outside the airport on that civilian side, and they were just constantly just bum rush us, break through, and we'd have to run all the way back to the military side of the airport, have to corral them, push them back. And I like to say that happened. I did that approximately 4 times of just constantly pushing them all the way back to the civilian side of the airport, the line getting broken through, having to run all the way back to the military side of the airport and having to push them back. That probably happened at least 4 times. It just happened so many times I just lost count. And obviously another one would be when the civilians were clinging onto the side of the C-17. And then I just never imagined they would attempt to hang on, that level of desperation they had to hang on to the airport, and obviously seeing the bodies drop in the sky. And then it feels like when that happened, that was the first time there was probably silence in the airport for a couple seconds. As the airplane was taking off, there was cheers from the civilians in the airport. And as it took off, as the people started falling, it was just, there was no more screaming. Like, I think the airport went silent for like 10 seconds. And then as the bodies hit the ground, it was just immediate chaos again. After that gunfight occurred, it was just constant, like, reassessing the situation, looking out, like just seeing the civilian crowd, just seeing masses of them. Like after the gunfight, because the Taliban fighters that we shot were all in civilian attire, so it was, anyone in this crowd could potentially have a gun on them right now. There's all these windows on the civilian terminal, buildings behind it. All these buildings are tinted. We couldn't just, it was just impossible to just like constantly just looking out, where do I hold my security? It was just impossible. It's like, we really wouldn't be able to identify threats. And at that moment I was like, okay, this is completely from now on just going to be a reactive situation. So we were at Northgate. So at that point in time, we had closed off Northgate for several hours. So the rotation aspect was still there, where we had dudes by the gate itself, dudes on overwatch positions, and dudes Marine staged in the area for search people. So my platoon was on the shift of the area where we would search people. So when that happened, I actually found out from my school teacher back home that the bombing happened. I got a text from him saying, "Are you okay? I heard there was a bombing." And my response was like, "What bombing are you talking about?" And then a couple minutes later, the ground attack siren happened, but I didn't think much of the siren because every couple days that siren would go off, and we would ask, "Why is it going off?" And we really couldn't get a clear answer at certain times. So I just thought it was just another time where the ground attack siren was coming off. Probably like 30 minutes later, word started trickling down that there was a bombing at Abbey Gate. Not much specific info, but that U.S. casualties had occurred, and that's when we got actually rotated to the overwatch position. And during that time period, it was just constant updates of the number of U.S. casualties increasing. Like another squad leader in my platoon would constantly come by us and tell us, "Oh, it's now 6 now. Oh, it's now 7." And it was just, can't really think of a word to describe the type of feeling it was as you just keep hearing the numbers go up. And also at the same time, we were also getting an intel updates that a potential VBID was headed towards Northgate. So our company commander made a decision to take down that platoon who was at the gate, bring them back inside the wire a little bit more, and that we just have some standoff just in case that VBID would potentially come to our gate. And we got a bolo of the potential VBID. However, we just knew that it'd be a very difficult job to pick out that car, because right in front of Northgate was a major road with traffic passing through all the time. So if there was a VBID coming through our gate, it would potentially probably just be too late for us to even spot it. So on the day that we were leaving Afghanistan, we were all staged and prepped to get on C-17s. That's when we heard an air attack siren go off, and the C ramps start going off, and we didn't. I couldn't tell you what kind of air attack we were receiving. I believe it was rockets being fired into the airport, but I just remember our company leadership telling us to take cover inside this building, and then after that settled down, we just hopped down back into the plane and we left. Key leaders are usually more so in the back, controlling everything. However, during those first 2 days when the airfield was under seizure, what I truly believe inspired a lot of Marines out there was seeing everyone from our company first sergeant, our company CO, company XO, battalion sergeant major, battalion CO, all out on the line, actually actively helping out with crowd control. They weren't just in some vehicle all the way in the rear in some secure position. They were actually out there with the boys and actually engaging in the crowd control, which I truly believe was like the biggest epitome of like fighter leader concept that gets preached in the Marine Corps a lot. I mean, obviously, like said previously, when shopping, it was a clean airport, civilians walking around, people doing their jobs, shops open. On the last day, it looked like it was just a complete change of scenario. The amount of trash, clothing, bags just all strewn out the streets. Like a lot of the streets were just, you couldn't even see the concrete on a lot of these roads because they're just covered in clothing, bags that the civilians were just leaving behind to get on to these flights. And at this point, we had closed down majority of the gates, and it was just getting ready to leave. I think one thing the great out there was the composure aspect. We were going through days of barely any sleep, having to deal with the desperation of people, and you could see the stress getting to people. But even with it, with all that stress occurring inside of everybody, everyone still remained professional, and it was just no one ever broke down. No one really lost it and did something way out of proportion, and it was just, I don't know the word. I mean, the entire time we were out there, the op tempo was insanely fast, so I don't think anyone really got a chance to process a day's occurrence while we were out there. So when we did get back to Kuwait, I think everyone was just conducting their own processing of the events that occurred, dealing with it, re-looking back at things, and obviously we had your fellow boys or like your platoon to talk about it with, look back at things like, oh, remember what happened this day, and it was just, everyone was definitely trying to figure out a way to how to process it in their minds while we were in Kuwait. Experiences that I remember would have to be the first 2 days on that airfield. Just a variety of stuff that was just thrown at your face, from the elderly heat casing on the tarmac to babies being delivered in some hangar bay to the people falling off the plane. It was just, you would think you saw the craziest thing of your life, and then something else would happen and it would just blow that last thing out of proportion. Resupply started flowing in, and once they came in, it was just, each person at least had 3 cartons of cigarettes out there, and you're just running through the pack by the hour. The flavor was called City Nights, and I don't know if it was the aesthetic of the name that just like made it taste better, but it was something that, oh look, it was like the carton coloring. It was just like City Nights. It was like, oh, these must be so good. And then they had those little bubbles that you can pop on the ends of the butts of the cigarettes, and it was just, I would go looking for those. I mean, the way I believe America can remember those 13 would just be never to forget about this incident. Obviously, it's a very touchy subject, as we were there for 20 years and how political the withdrawal was. At the end of the day, I don't think the politics really matter. That's out of our control. And the best thing we can do is just to never forget the names. And I believe internally in the Marine Corps, we do a pretty good job of never forgetting those who came before us, always remembering and respecting those. And I believe that if we try to push that message out to the rest of America, they can also continue to remember those names too. That those 13 were out there trying to evacuate as many civilians as possible, evacuated approximately 130,000 civilians. And I think that's the way we should look at this whole withdrawal incident, is not the politics of it, but how those 13 were part of this operation that probably saved thousands of lives from the Taliban. To get out of this mindset that you joined the Marine Corps during a peacetime time frame and that you're never going to see anything, because that was the same thought process that I had going on this MEU. We're just going to float around for a couple months, do some training ops here and there, maybe go get some libo ports. But I think the biggest aspect that new Marines coming to 1-8 can see is that this is an example of anything around the world can happen at any time, and that you should never take training lightly, because today we might be at peace, but tomorrow we could be at war. Hopefully my old company gunnery sergeant, he just PCS 29 Palms a couple weeks ago. But before he was on this deployment, he was the weapons platoon sergeant for that deployment. And after we got back from deployment, started going up in billets and ranks, he was definitely there to help mentor me as a squad leader following on. And it was also the shared experience that we had over there definitely helped in that bond. And he was just constantly there to teach me and guide me and mentor me in the ways.